Well, hello and welcome. This is the third video in a 6-video series on the Protestant Reformation. Today we're going to focus on Martin Luther, probably the single most significant person behind the Protestant Reformation. So we'll just talk a little bit today about who he was and what his big ideas were, what he believed about faith and salvation, and that'll be the video for today. So starting first with Martin Luther, there's a lot of things that we could talk about with Martin Luther, so I'll try to keep it pretty simple. I referenced in the video before this that John Green and Crash Course have an excellent video on the Protestant Reformation that does a really good job of talking about Martin Luther. So if you haven't already viewed that, I'd really encourage you to take a look at that. But just to highlight a few things about him as a person, he didn't originally set out to be a part of the church. He didn't set out to be a monk and a teacher of Scripture. Originally, he was set to be a lawyer, but had a near-death experience when he was around 21 years old, where in the midst of a storm where he thought he might end up being killed, he said a prayer that basically if he made it out alive, that he would become a monk and dedicate himself to the church and dedicate himself to God. Well, as it turns out, he survived, and then he kept good on his pledge to become a monk. So from the age of 21 moving forward, he dedicated himself to Bible study, basically. He ultimately became a teacher in the University of Wittenberg in Germany of Scripture. So for somebody to reach some new conclusions or come to some new insights as it related to the faith of Christianity, it made sense, I suppose, that Luther would be somebody who would be in position to uncover something new or think differently about something. And it was ultimately through his study that he reached some conclusions about faith and about salvation that put him in conflict with what the Catholic Church was teaching about all that at this time. And so what I want to go through today is just talk about what his big ideas were about faith. Now, one issue in particular will be a significant one for this movement, and that is the issue of indulgences. But I'm going to actually wait until my next video to talk more specifically about the circumstances around indulgences and how that really put all of this in motion. So for the rest of the video, I just want to look at the three big ideas or key ideas that Luther had where he was viewing things a little differently from the church, and also talk a little bit about why that was a big deal. So first of all, the issue of salvation. When you think about matters of faith, that's in many ways the ultimate about the faith that you may choose to believe in, or why you may not choose to believe in any faith at all. And so with salvation, we're talking about when you die, what ultimately ends up happening. And so as we talk about some of these ideas, starting first with salvation, if you look at what's on the screen there, I've really tried to draw some pictures out to do some compare and contrast visually between Luther's perspective and the perspective of the church. And so if you look along the top row, you see Luther believed that faith was what led to salvation. The belief that faith in God and in God's forgiveness, that's what would ultimately lead to salvation. Now, the church viewed things a little bit differently, and the key difference is that though the church acknowledged faith and God's forgiveness as a part of salvation, they also emphasized good works. And so this could mean any number of things that were also a part of the process of salvation. So, for example, attending Mass, participating in communion, engaging in confession, things like that were also things that you needed to do to ultimately achieve salvation. So one thing I think is important to think about is why would these be concerning ideas to the church that somebody like Luther would come up with something a little different? And part of it, I think, is helpful to think, and this is not to be insulting or anything to the church or religious institutions or anything, but if you think of the church in Europe at this time like a business, like any business, they want customers. That's how they stay in business. And with Luther's ideas just on salvation, he was basically saying that what you believe in and your faith, that's the key, and that's it, and that's that. You don't need anybody else. You don't need to have a priest to confess to. You don't need to participate in some of the rituals of the church. It's just between you and God. And so that was something that could be a little concerning for the church. If people believed they didn't need the church for salvation, they might leave the church. Now, second area that Luther addressed that was a big deal was just in the idea of authority. So in the matter of the Christian faith, what is the ultimate authority? And as Luther studied and as Luther thought, he concluded that the Bible was the ultimate authority, that if you wanted the go-to for the information, it wasn't through any individual person, but it was held in the Bible itself. And on top of that, he suggested that you could read and interpret the Bible yourself. Now, if you looked at ultimate authority in the eyes of the church, what they believed was the ultimate authority, there were really a couple of things that they said represented the authority that were definitely different than what Luther was talking about. They said that the Pope and that the traditions of the church were the ultimate authority for the Christian faith. And so again, when you think in terms of a business and wanting customers and having people have a need for that business, the church could be concerned about this perspective, because basically he was saying if you could get a Bible in your hands, that's really all you needed. You didn't need what the Pope had to say. You didn't need the practices of the church day in and day out. If you had access to the Bible, that would be ultimately all you would need. And then a third area of significance where Luther had some ideas that were a little different than the church had to do with equality and how people were viewed in the eyes of God. And so again, if you look across the top, basically what Luther concluded was that all people of faith are equal in God's eyes. So God doesn't see anybody any differently, no matter who you are, whether you're the Pope, whether you're just regular people in the community, whether you're a priest, a bishop, a cardinal, everybody is the same in God's eyes. Whereas the church very much favored a hierarchical way of seeing things, where the Pope was the highest human, I guess you could say, and that there was a hierarchy with the Pope at the top and cardinals, bishops, priests, monks and nuns, and then ultimately working down to regular people. And so especially in a society where the vast majority of people were just, in essence at the bottom of society, this idea that maybe in just this one way, they were equal to the Pope or they were equal to a king was certainly appealing. And so again, when you think in terms of like a business, this was concerning to the church, because if you want to be the authority, it can be more difficult to be the authority if the view is everybody is the same. So this was a big deal as Luther started to throw some of these ideas out there. Now, Luther is not the first person to ever have ideas that were in contradiction to things that the church talked about. But one thing is going to be a little bit different about this time, and I'll get into this more in the next video, and that is the ability to communicate these ideas. That was very different at this time. Luther really started putting his ideas out there late in 1517, many, many years, over half a century after printing presses started to be built and started to become a regular fixture in communities around Europe. So one of the things that will be very different is it's not just that Luther has these ideas, but he's now going to have an ability and a way to be able to share them, and they're going to be able to travel and circulate and reach a lot of people. So that's where I'll leave it for now. So I hope you enjoyed this video. The next video is going to take a look at the issue of indulgences and just what that was, how that impacted things between Luther and the church, people in the church, how people viewed the church, and some of the changes that would ultimately lead to. Thanks.